where not just women are in danger, but all marginalized people, where being uniquely different right now might truly be considered a crime. It seems as though we had all slipped into a false sense of comfort, that justice would prevail and that good would win in the end. Well, good did not win this election, but good will win in the end. So what today means is that we are far from the end. Today marks the beginning of our story. The revolution starts here. The fight for the right to be free, to be who we are, to be equal. Let's march together through this darkness, and with each step, know that we are not afraid. That we are not alone. That we will not back down. That there is power in our unity, and that no opposing force stands a chance in the face of true solidarity. And to our detractors that insist that this march will never add up to anything,
Boston Red here with Friday Java, a weekly magazine of political theory, polling, and commentary. It is part of the history called people that make up this fascinating journey. We are part of the Obama network. For that, we make no apologies. What we pledge to do is give you the facts on a bridge to history, what body politics is, the most up-to-date theories of political science and psychology. Stay tuned for this incredible ride. Boston Red, peace out.
WBRN Radio presents Friday Java on the 8th of September 2017. This is our magazine show. We, of course, every Friday we have or most Fridays, the University of Virginia's Larry Sabato's crystal ball, as opposed to the Ouija board, which we have. Nonetheless, the Ouija board moves along, the crystal ball moves along. We'll start out here with climatic reporting. An earthquake in Mexico on its Pacific coast is an 8.1 strikes the Pacific coast of Mexico. Now, Mexico does have a Pacific coast. The epicenter was 87 kilometers, that is 54 miles south-southwest of the town of Pitahopan. Well, anyway, I messed it up. But anyway, a tsunami warning had been issued for Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Panama, and Honduras. The quake was felt in Mexico City with people running into the street. The tremor there was about 1,000 kilometers from the epicenter that was reported had lasted up to a minute. 2 deaths were reported in the Mexican state of Chiapas, close to the epicenter, and 2 more in Tabasco state. Guatemalan president also reported at least 1 death in that country. Damage was reported to buildings in southern Mexico and Guatemala. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center said that the tsunami was reaching more than 3 meters above the tide level. Tide levels are possible along the coast of Mexico. There is a coastal evacuation in Chiapas. I'll get that right in a minute here. The Mexican president, Peña Nieto, tweeted he was in contact with the country's Center for Disaster Prevention. Schools have been closed in Mexico City and Chiapas. It's confirmed as 8.1 earthquake would be the biggest in strength to strengthen to those that struck Mexico in 1995 and 1985. Hit close to Mexico City and caused thousands of deaths there in Mexico. So we're having all kinds of climatic things going on here. A series of aftershocks ranging 4.3 to 5.7 in magnitude. They used to talk about the Richter scale. I'm not sure if the Richter scale is around anymore. The Guatemalan president, Jimmy Morales, appealed for calm on national TV and in a Twitter post. So a lot of people are on Twitter these days. It started out with the Twitter king, the former mayor of the urban ghetto of Newark, one Cory Booker. And, of course, it was popularized by none other than DJ Trump, now the chief executive of the United States. So many people are on Twitter. We're on Twitter also as Boston Red. You can find us there. Here's our central communications posts. We have several Twitter feeds coming in and out. And to Irma. Irma is heading to Florida. And this is where we start our coverage of Irma. Howling winds, rough seas, battered the British overseas territory. And of course, you have these colonial master types heading to various possessions that they have. And in South Florida, 500,000 people were told to leave South Florida. Irma will arrive there on a Sunday. We thought it was on Saturday, but on Sunday. An estimated 1.2 million have been affected by Irma, and could rise to 28 million. That's according to the Red Cross Society. And a lot of complaints against the Red Cross, incidentally. The storm is predicted to reach Cuba next before hitting the American state of Florida. And let's see what else here we have. Just from various outlets here, what has actually happened in Puerto Rico, St. Martin's, Butter, I suppose. Barely inhabited, 95% of the buildings are damaged there, according to Gaston Brown. Reconstruction will cost $100 million. Our 80 million pounds, one debt was confirmed, mostly property damage there. In Puerto Rico, 6,000 residents are in shelter. The Virgin Islands, that's the American part, damage to inner structure widespread in the Virgin Islands. And in some of the British protectorates also, there is extreme damage there. And let's go to the Washington Post, and we'll have an update there from the governor of Florida. Whoops. There was one. Nonetheless, this is from the governor of Florida. The headline here in the Washington Post: the storm has potential to catastrophically devastate our state. That is from the governor of Florida, Scott. And various the peninsula of Florida, the Keys, as Rick Scott said. That was his statement in a late news briefing. We'll go in a minute to the Miami Herald. And highways, of course, are jammed. Gas is scarce. I wonder where H is there. Anyway, airports were packed and mandatory evacuations began to roll out on the peninsula of Florida there. Millions of residents from Miami to East Naples on the Gulf Coast because the east side of the storm is the most powerful there. That's was on Thursday afternoon. They've started to evacuate Miami Beach. The mayor there, Phil Levine, tweeted later, noting in a news release that once the winds top 40 miles an hour, First responders will no longer be dispatched on rescue missions. In Bryan County, evacuation in coastal areas were slated for Thursday. Lee County on the Gulf Coast announced Thursday afternoon that all barrier islands, Pine, Fort Myers Beach will be under mandatory evacuations later today, Friday. Scott's declared a statewide emergency there, and also in Georgia, in North Carolina. I have to talk to Nancy. She's in South Carolina. Governor Deal expanded his declaration for 6 coastal counties. Residents in Savannah, the hometown of the infamous Clarence Thomas, and Charleston, South Carolina, began to barricade their homes and flee the coast on Thursday. McMaster's warned the South Carolinians that a mandatory evacuation of the coastline will probably come on Saturday morning. Irma on Thursday remained a Category 5. That is high as you can go. 150 miles an hour. Winds are coming there. The Florida Keys evacuations there. The post in its headquarters in West Miami-Dade County. That computer models were, of course, flashing there. Now, Irma sustained winds were strongest recorded for an Atlantic hurricane making landfall, tied with the 1935 Florida Keys hurricane. Look at the size of this storm. That's according to Scott, the National Hotel on Miami Beach. A manager announced in 4 languages, English, Espanol, Portuguese, and French, that guests need to evacuate because of a city order. And also there's reports of price gouging at airports, because this time of year airfares are relatively cheap because of people don't go to Florida in the summer. Various others, including Trump's place there, are under evacuation. And these are just statements from various people. So that is a story in Florida. And what is basically happening there, that they are getting ready today to evacuate. And I suppose more evacuations will come on Friday. And into Sunday will be a lot of evacuations there. And, of course, as the storm comes in, the Congress has been preparing for this by appropriating another $7 billion, part of the package that DJ Trump negotiated with Chuck and Nancy to cover that, and also to cover the deficit. Now, AccuWeather there is talking about the way the storm will track, and it's interesting. AccuWeather has used to be the Weather Channel. Of course, IBM controls it now. Free access to the Herald.com throughout the storm. We'll put this up. South Florida is under a hurricane warning as Irma approaches. Unprecedented evacuation. We'll stay here for a minute, as they would say, in Chicago, so we can get the up-to-date scene of the airport here. We'll put this up. Just how catastrophic South Florida leaders fear the Hurricane Irma could become evident Thursday when Dade County ordered an evacuation. The mayor, unprecedented there. We're preparing for the worst. That's from the mayor, Carlos Jimenez. It said a moment after instructing more than 650,000 people to get out. Decision announced after lengthy internal analysis of flood maps, big data, we'll call it, projections of potential deadly storm surges from the National Hurricane Center. Irma is set to hit the Florida Peninsula. For exactly where is not certain at this point in time. A lot of information out there, but we don't really know exactly where it will hit. In the middle of all this, frantic residents try to figure out if the order applies to them and their loved ones. I think this is going to be catastrophic. There's Dave Kinsley, a South Beach resident who waited for a county school bus to shuttle him and others senior to shelters on the mainland. So people are moving on. Expanded its, this is Miami-Dade, to Zone B, encompassing Brackett and downtown, large portions of South Dale, the major highway, the Florida Turnpike, I-95 interstate, I-95 interstate 75 became increasingly paralyzed. The Turnpike toll is suspended. It was most jammed from Palm Beach County through Orlando, that's I-75, Gainesville, Lake City. Still a friend lived in Lake City. And gasoline shortage were the state so much that Scott asked law enforcement to escort fuel tankers driving in to replenish the stations. DJ Trump addressed the responsive there and the U.S. Virgin Islands. So in other words, they have a lot going on here. The University of Florida called up a scheduled football game on Saturday that would have put thousands of Gator fans on I-75. The last day Floridians can use the highway as an evacuation route. The University of Miami ordered its first evacuation ever, sending 150 students who remain on the shutdown campus to a Red Cross shelter. The Archdiocese of Miami suspended regular Mass. Something probably unheard of there. Monroe County has gotten 131,000 people out of the Keys by 6 p.m. Wednesday. The governor said residents were ordered to leave by the end of Thursday, with a public bus shuttling them from Key West to Florida International University. There, so this is some of the latest from the epicenter in Florida. The Herald is up there, and we'll put a link to the Miami Herald on the show situation here. So we moved from Houston to Miami is where we are now. Let's quickly look at some of the other news. The Republicans, of course, are recovering from DJ Trump's latest deviation, working with Chuck and Nancy to bring about a debt ceiling increase, and now there is talk of moving it. The Republicans wanted to move this debt ceiling fight past November of 2018. That's an election year. But there is talk, and there's been talk before, of getting legislation where they will not have to go there every budgetary year and do the ceiling, that it will automatically rise, a much more appropriate way of doing things. So we'll see where this goes. They're jolted Democrats weary of Trump's overtures to opposing party. Well, the situation is anything with DJ Trump, you take it or leave it depending on what DJ puts on the table. According to Chris Murphy's Center from Connecticut, there aren't permanent alliances. There aren't governing philosophies. There's day-by-day seat of the pants management. Well, that's basically what it is. And part of the reason for that, more and more on Numbers Man, we talk about this quite a bit. That's our macroeconomics program. Our seesaw model economies, this is global economies are up and down there. China is strong for a few months, and then, of course, China sort of backs off. And then you have strong economies, say, for instance, in Germany, and it will back off a bit in Britain. In other words, you don't have a continual pattern, straight line. That doesn't happen. So now this so-called policy or legislation itself has become a very problematic, not pragmatic. that you have these alliances, and you should have had these alliances a long time ago, and G.W. Bush had to rely on Democrats to bring, as they say, the bacon home. You'll see that on some things, but part of the problem is the underlying philosophy of the Trump administration. For instance, in the education department, the head of the education, old Betty there, has issued a directive by the Trump administration, actually through the Department of Justice, that they will back off of Obama-era sexual investigation techniques at universities. Their excuse is to give due process to, quote-unquote, the perpetrator, not necessarily the victim. As one who was involved many, many times in rape cases, that was the old way of doing things. It was basically like the British system, but a different sort of way. In other words, the victim of a sexual assault was presumed not to be the forthcoming party. In other words, the party that was very suspect to begin with, whereas the person that was the rapist was afforded a myriad of defense strategies, including bringing in the victim's record. In other words, if the victim had say, sexual intercourse with a number of partners, that could be brought in to disparage her reputation. Most time wasn't her situation. So this will be a situation at universities that to be very wide latitude, such as recently happened at a number of universities. The University of Minnesota comes in there with the football players who were put in an administrative situation and put on probation. Some were expelled. But when you tried to get this evidence into a quote-unquote criminal case, it didn't pass the muster. And those things will be looked at. That's on one front. Those are some of the side issues that's coming in. We've covered Irma quite as much as we can. No need to get it from the Post. But out in the state of Utah, we'll do this, and then we'll go to the University of Virginia at Charlottesville. Prosecutors out there in Salt Lake County have asked the FBI to join in a criminal probe into the violent arrest of a local nurse, Ms. Wobbles, who was manhandled by a detective, shoved there and streaming into a squad car. She tried to protect the legal rights of a patient. The state's attorney, or county attorney there, Slim Gill, called the FBI just to investigate whether the officer or anyone else in the chain of command violated Alex Wobbles' civil rights or broke over laws during the 26th of July incident. This is from this character, Jeff Payne, a detective with the Salt Lake City Police Department and at the University of Utah Medical Center, where Wobbles was or is the head nurse on duty at the time of the burn unit. So we covered that story. You can check out our episode, Alex Wobbles, All-American Hero, and went in depth an interview with her. From the Associated Press, that the agency had joined county investigators. Salt Lake City Police didn't have anything to say. Naturally, they would not. Now going to the Salt Lake Tribune, detective's body cam confirms that Logan police asked him to back off the blood draw. Now, this is by Luke Ramsett of the Salt Lake Tribune. Logan Police Chief Gary Jensen assertion that his officers did not push to get the blood drawn from the victim of a fiery crash that was in Cache County. She refused to allow this character Payne to get a blood draw. Jansen said one of his detectives investigating the crash told Payne not to worry about pushing for a blood draw because Logan could get the blood sample through other means. He said the Logan office didn't initially realize the crash victim, William Gary, was unconscious and unable to consent to a blood draw. The investigator tells Payne, "Hey, don't worry about it. We are going another route. No worries there." That's according to Jansen with the paper footage. And of course, we all know about that. Lieutenant James Tracy, who ordered Payne to get the blood in the first place, conferred about the escalating situation. Tracy said he had just learned that the hospital routinely takes blood from patients such as Gary on arrival. So in other words, they would get a subpoena. So I think what we'll do is, this isn't even our case. I'm trying to deal with it. We'll call Logan back. In other words, it was Logan's case. Payne interrupted. I already talked to them a couple of times. Are they pissed off we can't get the blood? Asked Tracy. No, Payne said. I think we're going to release Wobbles. Tracy said we're going to tell her charges are going to be screened off. Actually, what we are going to tell her is because I don't even want to write this incident up. We got to write it up. Payne corrected him several times in the conversation. The fact that Payne's body camera is turned on is mentioned. No, I mean, I do. I want to write it up. Tracy quickly said later, after formulating their plan, in other words, their scheme for releasing Waddles, called the Logan police, the Logan, Utah police back, said, let's just do that and get the hell out of here. Jansen said his detectives had told Payne about the situation before Payne arrested Wobbles. Jansen for 25 years took blood draws with his along with his officer duties, and said it's routine to seek blood from someone involved in a fatal crash. The crash. Gary was a truck driver there and a reserve officer in Rugby, Idaho. Anyway, while the Logan police could have sorted a medical subpoena to get the blood that was collected by the hospital, Jansen said they didn't. Police decided that they did not need the blood to proceed with the trash investigation. Now, this is where a lot of contradictions are coming in here. I've worked with him a number of occasions, but I didn't know why, especially after we said we were going another route, why Payne and Tracy felt compelled to continue. Salt Lake City police spokesman Christina Judge said that the assistant chief, Tom Doubt, decided to take Payne off the blood draw team, but not to place him on administrative leave after the university officers informed him of the arrest late the same evening. The next morning, Doubt watched the body cam video of the encounter, and later in the day, Judge said Doubt and several legal staffers met with the hospital people, the Utah University police chief, etc. Payne, the second officer believed to be Tracy. Now, they are both on suspension, should be placed on administrative leave immediately. The mayor said in a list of frequent questions asked that she presented to the council on Tuesday, the department decision to delay the move until September the 1st, the day after Waddles and her attorney released the footage. So in other words, once the footage was out here, they acted, and this has been a guiding thing in many of these types of cases, and had not been for the body cam, this incident would have not seen the light of day. You can see these characters conspiring not to even write it up, to just let her go, and the only people who would have known about it were the people present there. Three investigations on the way, one by the Department of Internal Affairs, you can get that one, the Civilian Review Board, and one by the Salt Lake County Unified Police Department. And now the FBI is in this matter. And to combat efforts, Police Chief Mike Brown appeared on a program, WUER program, and Brown said he was alarmed and concerned after seeing the video for the first time last week, though he added that the incident was an outliner and should not reflect on the rest of the department. It hurt. We got a black eye, said Brown. Well, no doubt they did get a black eye here. And that was pretty much the end of that story there. From the Desert News, this is owned by the Mormon Church. Basically, they have the same story that the FBI was asked into the investigation of controversial race and detainment of the Utah nurse Alex Wobbles. There continues to be an issue that goes beyond merely a criminal investigation. In the effort to address these concerns, the Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office has formally asked for assistance from our federal law enforcement partners to fully vent issues they can only investigate. That's a civil rights complaint. Now, what is happening here is that you see a shift, and you've seen a number of these civil rights complaints out there. Insufficient evidence, generally because of the way the law is written. But now when you start putting a European face on it, like Waddles, it's a different situation and a little bit dicey. At one point during the recording, the officer, Denton Harper, asked Payne why he didn't get a warrant for the blood. Payne replied that he doesn't have a probable cause. Now, no doubt, he later claimed he could legally take the blood on the implied dissent he was crazy. Now, Waddles was ultimately released after his superior, this is Lieutenant Tracy, is heard telling Payne in the video that the arrest wouldn't stick. I imagine not. Both Payne and Tracy were placed on it. Now, the Desert News were placed on administrative leave. Gill said he saw the video for the first time that night and immediately called his staff to find out what was going on. Over the Labor Day weekend, he reached out to the FBI. This is a little bit more in-depth story. Very interesting that it comes from the Desert News owned by the Mormon Church. We ask our community and citizens to be patient, Gill said. We assure them that this issue is of the utmost concern for us, and we're continuing to assuring a thorough, fair gathering and review of the evidence, facts, and issues. The Unified Police Department is helping conducting an investigation for District Attorney's Office. They are both the Salt Lake Chief Brown, the Mayor Jackie Biskype, anyway, Buskowski. Anyway, he had apologized to Wobbles there. And this is by Pat Reby. He's a veteran police reporter. Now we'll move on to Dr. Sabato. The Senate sequesters the history of the upper and lower chambers rematches. 1 month after DJ Trump won his victory, Ohio Treasurer Jock Mandel announced the long-expected Senate bid against Sherrod Brown, who defeated him in 2012. That was 51-45. That was the same year that Barack Obama was reelected to his second term. The Buckeye State will likely see a rematch with millions upon millions of dollars spent on behalf or against the populist liberal Mr. Brown and the Trumpist conservative Mandel. In the primary, Mandel will have to first get past a business type named Mike Gibbons, who has hired staff with connections to the governor there, John Kasich, which is he's term limited from running for governor again. Mandel began his as a clear favorite in the on the GOP side. There, Senate rematches are relatively rare, at least in the context of there being more than 30 elections Senate elections every 2 years. There have been 46 separate Democrat versus Republican rematch in the era of popular elections as since 1913, direct election of senators, with 44 pairs of candidates. 2 pairs have 3 contests against one another, i.e. 2 rematches. Now, this is just some of the types here that they go back to 1960. We won't get into most of these. Bob Bartlett and Lee McKinley. This is 1960 in Arkansas. Anyway. And in Arizona, Ernest McFarland and Barry Goldwater in 1952. And the second election was 1958. Ted Strickland out in Colorado, 1996 and 2001, Wayne Aldrin. And in Delaware, Joe Biden and Ray Chatworth, 1996 and 2002. Daniel in Norway. Well, I won't get into too many of these. John Brown, John Cooper, that was in Kentucky, 1946 and 1966. In the gap in years here, Ernest Hollings, out of South Carolina, 1966 and 1968, or 2 years there. And let's see if we can get anyone else of any. Oh, Russ Feingold and Ron Johnson, 2010, 2016, 6-year gap there. Ron Johnson won re-election just recently here. I was thinking of them. Jay Rockefeller and Jay Wolf. That's in West Virginia, 2002, 2008, 6-year gap there. Joe Meechan and John Rossi. 2010, that was a special election there, and 2012. Yeah, I'll kind of leave it at that. But anyway, this sort of shows the guide here. West Virginia has more Senate rematches than any other state, with 4 of the Mountain State moved into the lead in this category following the victory of Joe Manchin in 2012. We just talked about that particular one. States with the most Senate rematches by census region. If you look at in the West, 1 rematch, Washington State, no rematches in Oregon or in Montana, 3 rematches in Idaho and Nevada, 2 rematches in Wyoming, Utah, and Arizona. In California, no rematches there, Colorado and New Mexico. And in the Midwest, 1 rematch in Minnesota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Wisconsin. Anyway, and no rematches in the Northeast if you go from Maine down to Pennsylvania, etc. And in the South, Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. 0 rematches there. You had 1 in South and North Carolina and Virginia and Kentucky. The 2 regions of the country that have seen fewer rematches in terms of percentage, with at least 1 in Northeast and the South. Categorized in Senate rematches, these 46 rematches could be categorized into 4 bins. The first bin would include possible rematches between Brown and Mendel, while setting incumbent anyway. And Category 1, challenge ties again after losing to incumbent the first time. Tries again, excuse me. There've been some of those. To think of it in Well, a little different, actually, in Wisconsin. Senator Feingold was a senator and lost to Johnson, and then Johnson was a senator there. The loser of an open seat contest tries again. 1970, that was Robert Taft Jr. That's in Ohio. The Taft family defeated Howard Metzenbaum by 2 points, Jr., in a closely fought race there. 6 years later, Metzenbaum beat Taft in a tight contest by 3 points. That's in Ohio. You remember Howard Metzenbaum a long time ago. Over 4 instances, Metzenbaum ran slightly ahead of Jimmy Carter. That was in a 76 cycle. And goes back to 36, 48, and 2008. All Democrats benefited from strong performance by other candidates. 36 scores out of Franklin Delano Roosevelt won, of all places, Wyoming by 61% of the vote, helping Harry Swartz to defeat Robert Curry. I don't know who the hell he was, but anyway, doesn't really matter. Large gap in time, that's the next category, at least 12 years later or more, and I'm not sure who these characters were, and I don't remember who they were. Oh, I see why. 1910. That was Senator K. Pittman and Sam Platt, who twice ran against 12 years. I don't know. Anyway, the conclusion. There were too few historic rematches to make a strong declaration about Mandel's chances against Brown, Ohio in 2018. Well, a lot of that will depend on what happens with DJ Trump, particularly with the economy. The economy is the 800-pound monster in the bear, or whatever you want to call it, in the room, and that will probably make or break more or less Ohio. And many other things could come in there too. How the progressives in Ohio respond to Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown is a liberal, but will some of the Bernie people run against him. We know that Ms. Turner is running for governor there in Ohio. So we have a number of people running and would run. Let's do the sports now. We are running a little late here, and I'm not sure if we keyed up to sports. We didn't. Anyway, quickly go to the sports and ESPN. Baseball season moves down day by day. Not sure where the Dodgers are these days, but we'll see very quickly here, no doubt. Yankees and Orioles in Camden Yards. Yankees 9-1. The Phillies and Nationals in D.C. 4-3. Nationals over Phillies. The Cubs and Pirates with a blowaway game there, 8-2. Cubs. The Reds and Mets in New York. Mets 7-2. The Marlins and Atlanta. Atlanta 6-5. Cleveland and the White Sox. Cleveland 11-2 over the White Sox. The Twins and Royals in Kansas City. Twins are 4-2. The Cardinals and Padres. The Cardinals were shut out. 3-0. The Rockies, finally, the Rockies and Dodgers. The Rockies have the Dodgers number 9-1 there. Mr. Kershaw lost in this particular match. This will do it for us. We'll see you on the week that was on Saturday morning, and also we'll see you on Numbers Man, our financial program, and we will get an open source report out. We've sort of been readjusting our schedules. Good day, and have a good weekend, everyone, also.